After Steph Curry dominated the 2022 NBA Finals, Andre Iguodala called Curry the greatest point guard of all time. Did Steph really bump Magic Johnson from the throne of the #1 point guard ever? Here's a detailed comparison between Steph and Magic to discover the true point guard GOAT. You can't win NBA championships without great teammates. Magic had Kareem and James Worthy. Jordan never won without Pippen. Kobe played with prime Shaq. And Steph won his titles with Klay, Draymond, and KD. But what differentiates Magic from all the guys we just mentioned was his ability to impact winning from the start. Kareem had been with the Lakers for 4 seasons before Magic arrived, and he won only 2 playoff series in those 4 years, despite winning multiple MVP titles. As soon as Magic was drafted in 1979, the Lakers won 60 games in a season and made it to the NBA Finals. Magic immediately proved that his leadership and winning mentality were at a GOAT level. Without Kareem, Magic started at center in Game 6 of the 1980 Finals, finishing with 42 points and 15 rebounds to lead the Lakers to the NBA championship, winning the Finals MVP trophy as a rookie. Johnson won another Finals MVP in his 3rd year and was an All-Star in every season except in 1981 when he was injured. If we account for his NCAA title in 1979, he had the best career start in NBA history. For Curry, it took him a while to transform from a skinny tweener to a superstar. He started his career as a second fiddle to Monte Ellis and nearly got traded in his 3rd season because of bad ankles. Curry made the playoffs for the first time in year 4 and became an All-Star in his 5th NBA season, which is a slower pace than any other player on the top 75 NBA players list. Steph has been a great shooter from the get-go, but overall, he wasn't as good of a player as other NBA greats in his first 3 or 4 years, and that's where Magic has a clear advantage. Magic is often considered the greatest passer in NBA history, while Curry is without any doubt the greatest shooter of all time. It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges in terms of offensive output, because both players are 2 of the best and most efficient players at their position, together with John Stockton and Steve Nash. Despite not being a great outside shooter, especially early on in his career, Magic has an excellent career true shooting percentage of 61%, just like Nash and Stockton, who were some of the greatest shooters ever. Johnson thrived thanks to his great transition offense, excellent post-up game, and efficient drives to the basket. Curry's true shooting is near 63%, and he's averaging 24.3 points per game in his career, which is nearly 5 points more than Magic's 19.5. However, Johnson averaged nearly 5 more assists than Curry, which would mean that he generated more points per game than Steph while being only slightly less efficient. But here, we have to take into account the difference in eras and the style of basketball that was played. In the early 80s, Magic's Lakers averaged only 20 made threes in a season, while the modern-day Warriors often make 20 threes in one game. So, Steph generates more points off assists because he assisted on more three-pointers. Also, just the threat of Curry's deep bombs spaces the floor and opens up driving lanes, especially because you have to pick him up as soon as he steps into half court. Curry cannot be left open. His gravitational pull draws the defense, and it's the driving force behind the Warriors' motion offense. So just looking at stats doesn't account for Steph's hockey assists, or all the baskets he sets up by demanding defensive attention everywhere he goes. Curry's off-ball movement is one of the best in NBA history, and he became proficient in creating screen assists, especially since he bulked up in the last few seasons. Another good argument for Steph is that Magic played nearly 3 more minutes per game than him, which inflates his numbers. Also in the playoffs, Johnson's scoring average remained at 19.5 and 39 minutes per game, while Steph's increased from 24.3 to 26.6 in the playoffs in 37 minutes per game. Steph also averages 27.5 points in his 6 trips to the NBA Finals, which ranks in the top 10 of all time, ahead of guys like Kobe, Kareem, and Larry Bird. If we compare their numbers per 100 possessions, it's clear that Steph generates more points than Magic. So, because he's extremely efficient with or without the ball, and because he creates so much space just by being Steph Curry, the greatest shooter ever, we have to give Curry the slight advantage in offensive output. And on the defensive end, Magic Johnson was never a great defensive player. He didn't make a single all-defensive team in his career, unlike the other top 10 all-time players. Even though he was fast running in a straight line, Johnson was extremely slow laterally because he was 6'9" and had a high center of gravity. In the 80s, his lack of athleticism and lateral quickness was somewhat masked because the game was played inside the three-point line, and it was easier to get steals in tighter spaces. Due to his length and basketball IQ that helped him predict what the offense was going to do, Magic even led the league in steals. But don't let the numbers fool you. Allen Iverson also led the NBA in steals because he gambled and jumped into passing lanes. But he was by all accounts a terrible defensive player. If Magic played in today's pace and space era, he'd probably get exploited and targeted on every possession, and it wouldn't be pretty. The same could be said for Steph Curry, whose small frame always made him a mark for opposing offenses. Curry was never a great defensive player in the past, but that has now changed. Steph has been bulking up, adding 15 pounds of muscle from his first championship year until now. He's no longer getting killed on screens and does not get bullied on switches by bigger guards and wings. In the 2022 NBA Finals, Boston tried to wear down Curry by constantly attacking him. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown targeted him in isolation, while Horford and Smart tried to beat him up in the post. Bulked up Curry just shrugged it off, and the Celtics scored a measly 0.79 points per chance on possessions when they attacked Curry in isolation. Steph's improved strength, mobility, lateral quickness, and willingness to hustle made him into a plus defender, which is exceptional for a player past the age of 30. While he certainly isn't going to get selected for the NBA All-Defensive team, Steph has become one of the better defensive guards in the NBA, and he now has a clear advantage over Magic in this department. However, it's always difficult making player comparisons from different eras. Contrasting rules, non-identical competition, and technology gaps are all factors that are nearly impossible to compare. But athletes from the modern era are generally faster, stronger, and more athletic than the athletes from the 70s or 80s. Bill Russell might be the winningest player of all time, but his 210-pound Chuck Taylor-wearing skinny body would be barbecue chicken if he played against prime Shaq. If a 2013 LeBron got into a DeLorean and traveled back in time to play basketball in 1963, he'd probably average 75 points per game. Aside from physical dominance and modern technology, players today are just much more skilled. They handle and shoot the ball better, and are tactically more advanced. Most players spend their summers in the gyms, with shooting coaches, nutritionists, and personal trainers. So if you want to know who would be a better player, prime Steph Curry from 2022 or prime Magic from the late 80s, the answer is pretty straightforward. Steph is a far superior shooter who doesn't even need to have the ball to be effective, and he became a much better defender. If a 2022 Steph time traveled to 1980, he'd easily average 40 points per game. If you don't believe us, go watch Magic Johnson's Game 6 highlights against the Sixers in the 1980 Finals. The Sixers were so slow in transition, and Magic outran them for nearly half of his 42 points, and they left him open on many jump shots, which were all two-pointers. If Steph Curry played in that game, with his ability to nail threes from 30 feet, it would be like hitting practice shots, because nobody would even guard him that far out. Magic's biggest advantage was his pace, ball handling, basketball IQ, and size in the post against smaller guards. A 6'9" point guard was a phenomenon in the 80s, but today's NBA is full of big guards that can handle the ball. If Magic played in today's fast-paced NBA, he wouldn't have a physical advantage, and he would always be guarded by tall, athletic demons such as LeBron, Kawhi, or Giannis. Because he didn't have a great jump shot, defenders would treat him like Ben Simmons or Draymond, backing off him and forcing him to take tough and inefficient shots. Defenses in the 80s weren't as good as some old heads like to brag. They were only allowed to foul harder. Even with the hand-checking rules in the 80s and the 90s, Steph Curry would dominate with his shooting and his superior ball handling, especially the 2022 buff version of Steph that couldn't get physically bullied. And because he is extremely well-conditioned, Steph would run circles around everybody, and players in the 80s would get dizzy trying to find him on the floor. So, in a Space Jam scenario, where we'd have to pick one point guard to save the Earth from Monstars in a basketball game, we'd take 2022 Steph over 1987 Magic, any day of the week, and twice on a Sunday. However, that still doesn't mean Steph is the greatest point guard of all time. In terms of basketball legacy and the greatest point guard of all time debate, it's hard to go against Magic Johnson. Magic instantly transformed the Lakers into a winning team, and they made 9 finals in his 12 seasons, winning 5 championships. Magic won the league MVP 3 times, most ever for a point guard. He made 10 All-NBA teams and 12 All-Star teams, and is generally more successful than Steph, despite retiring at the age of 31 due to HIV infection. Johnson won 73% of his games, which is the most in NBA history, and you really can't say anything against winning. Magic also had to get a lot of credit for bringing popularity back to the NBA when the league desperately needed it. And it's fair to say that Magic helped save the NBA from bankruptcy, alongside Larry Bird. We are not doubting his greatness as a player, and if 1987 Magic could time travel to the future and train like modern athletes, his basketball IQ, leadership, and winning mentality would come through. Due to better competition, more talent, and more teams in the league, Magic would probably not win as many championships, but he'd still be a dominant player, and we bet he'd play a lot like Luka Doncic. Steph still has a lot of basketball left to play, and he might collect more hardware to catch up with Magic in rings, All-Star, and All-NBA selections. But even if he retired now, his legacy is already set with phenomenal shooting that changed the game forever. 3 is more than 2, and Steph made the whole basketball world realize it with his golden touch from deep. Steph is also the easiest and most humble superstar to build your team around, and that's why Steve Kerr calls him the short Tim Duncan. Just like Timmy, Steph is one of the best teammates ever who always makes players around him better, leading by example. One could argue that his shooting records, efficiency, and impact on the game make him the GOAT point guard, but Magic has simply won more with less time in the league. So, we believe Magic is still the greatest point guard ever, even though Steph is a better overall player.